His attacks became more frequent, more violent. But during one of these brutal invasions, he made a mistake. He left behind something, a footprint. Police were able to trace the unique shoe print to a pair of Avia sneakers. One day it would be an elderly woman, the next a young couple. Every attack was different, and that made him nearly impossible to track. Police had no leads, no idea who this man was. What if I told you that in 1985, a scary shadow hung over Los Angeles, and no lock could keep you safe? Imagine living in a city where the Night Stalker could attack at any time. This clever monster sneaked into homes like a ghost, causing terrible things that broke families apart and made everyone afraid. People stayed awake at night, hearts racing, listening for any sign he was near. But he didn't just knock on doors, he ruined lives in the worst ways. What made him do these awful things? Are you ready to learn the chilling truth behind this nightmare? Richard Ramirez was unlike any criminal the city had ever seen. He didn't have a type, he had an obsession. He was driven by something dark, something that seemed almost supernatural. And it all started with a twisted inspiration from a family member who had shown him the worst the world had to offer. Ramirez wasn't born a killer, but he was raised by one. His older cousin Miguel was a Vietnam veteran, and he brought more than war stories back to Texas. He brought the thrill of terror with him. Miguel would boast to young Richard about the violence he'd committed overseas, showing him pictures of unspeakable acts. Richard was hooked. The images, the stories, they planted a seed that would grow into something monstrous. Fast forward to 1984. Los Angeles, one of the busiest, brightest cities in the world. But as summer approached, the city became cloaked in fear. Ramirez wasn't just any criminal. He was someone who left signs, who relished the chaos he caused, and, most chillingly, who didn't discriminate. He'd break into any home, anywhere, and no one knew how to stop him. The first sign that Los Angeles was facing a true monster came with the brutal murder of Jenny Vinsow, a 79-year-old woman who had lived a quiet life until Richard entered her home one night. No one could believe the brutality left behind, but this was only the beginning. As he continued to strike, fear spread like wildfire. The randomness was what terrified people the most. He didn't follow any pattern. One day it would be an elderly woman, the next a young couple. Every attack was different, and that made him nearly impossible to track. Police had no leads, no idea who this man could be. Richard was almost like a ghost, moving in and out of people's lives in the dead of night. The people of LA locked their doors, bought guns, stayed awake till sunrise. Still, he would find a way in. As his killing spree escalated, Richard seemed to feed off the terror he was creating. His attacks became more frequent, more violent. But during one of these brutal invasions, he made a mistake. He left behind something, a footprint. Police were able to trace the unique shoe print to a pair of Avia sneakers, but the discovery left them only with more questions. This was a killer who knew how to cover his tracks. How could one print change that? Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and each night the city waited in fear. Richard continued his spree with an unmatched level of brutality. He wasn't just invading homes, he was destroying lives, leaving a trail of horror and heartbreak. Then came his next mistake. One night in July, he struck a couple in their own home, and the woman survived. She was one of the few who would live to tell her story. Her bravery led to something no one had seen before, a face. For the first time, the world had a sketch of the man terrorizing Los Angeles. But here's the crazy part. This sketch only fueled him more. Richard wasn't scared, he felt invincible. He believed that he was being protected by a dark force, an invincibility he gained from his obsession with Satanism. He even left satanic symbols at some of his crime scenes, as if daring the police to catch him. People were desperate to end his terror, and the police were closer than ever. But then, just when they thought they'd caught up to him, he would vanish, striking somewhere new. By August 1985, LA was living a nightmare. He had the city in a grip of terror like never before, and people began to wonder if they'd ever truly be safe again. His final attack occurred in August 1985, and this time, the attack itself wasn't what did him in. No, it was something unexpected. When he went to flee, something went wrong. A group of people spotted him and recognized him. They'd seen his picture everywhere. The media had plastered it all over town. He was finally exposed. And here's the part no one saw coming. As he tried to escape, ordinary citizens began to chase him. That's right, a city that had been held hostage by fear now rose against him. He was running, desperate, knowing his time was running out. But they caught him. Regular people who'd had enough of the terror stopped him and held him until the police arrived. After his arrest, his trial became one of the most infamous in history. But even in captivity, he showed no remorse. Instead, he reveled in his notoriety. His dark charm drew in a strange crowd, with people actually admiring him, some even wanting to marry him. It wasn't until his sentencing that people felt a small sense of justice. Ramirez was given the death sentence. But due to California's complex legal system, he spent over 2 decades in prison, ultimately passing away from health complications rather than facing his original sentence. And with his death, one of the darkest chapters in Los Angeles history came to a close. Richard Ramirez left behind a legacy of fear, one that LA will never forget. He was the kind of criminal who thrived in darkness, who lived for the chaos. And even after his death, his story remains a chilling reminder of what happens when someone gives in to the darkest parts of their soul.